Welcome everyone to Jazz Sessions number 26. We've hit the half-year mark, and this week we will be talking about whose story is it anyway? We'll be looking at lessons from improv for plotters and pantsers, any kind of writer. This is half a year now. We've been doing this since back in May, and this is the latest session where we'll be trying to share free online writing lessons for writers. But first,
have to be prepared for all monetary possibilities. Get yourself some 50s clothes. Get back. Doc, this is Marty, over.
Inconspicuous. Yep. This is where we talk about paying for the soup, as Edith Keeler told us back in Star Trek. Back when Star Trek just meant Star Trek. Somebody said, it's time to pay for the soup. I'm giving away these free writing classes, never charging money for them, but I am wanting to share a word about some of my books. And so, as usual, one of the books I talk about is over here on the right, Making Story Models, my book on visualizing tools for outlining and planning and analyzing stories. And on the left, we have the second installment in my Maxwell's Demons series, Thrash Metal Homicide. This is a police procedural investigative team on Mars, and this time they are investigating a murder in the world of thrash metal. And we had a surprising guest appearance from Captain Nick Ames, which you may know from The Last Dance and The Last Campaign. So this is the story of what happens when Nick's favorite rock star is accused of murder. So if that's your sort of thing, if you want to look at story models and how they might help you in your writing, here are a couple of QR codes for that. As always, I like to start by pointing out that I am giving you tools, not rules. I do not believe in writing rules. Anyone telling you they have the rules for writing that you must follow is at best naive, and at worst is trying to sell you something. Naive because they learned some rules that somebody taught them because they desperately craved rules and they cannot handle the ambiguity that rules they learned are not rules. As Goldman told us, William Goldman, screenwriter for The Princess Bride, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and several other fantastic movies, nobody knows anything. He was talking about the screenwriting business, the filmmaking business, but it's just as true in all creative fields. Not one person in the entire motion picture field knows for a certainty what's going to work. If they knew, they would never make anything that wasn't a hit. If we knew rules for what would let you build a successful story, every story would be a bestseller, which is, of course, a meaningless concept. They can't all be your best, as my late mentor Mike Resnick once said. So there are no rules. There are tools you can learn and practice and study and apply and see if they work for you. And sometimes they will, and sometimes something you think should be a rule lets you down. But it's easy, especially when you're talking quickly, to call something a rule. If I say it's a rule, it's still just a tool. I'm no smarter than anybody else on this. Tools, not rules. So today, we want to talk about improv. And if you were watching TV for the last probably 20, almost 30 years, you may have been familiar with this improv up here on the left. The improvisational comedy show called Whose Line Is It Anyway? And this is the traditional thing that people think of when they hear the term improv. comedy sketches made up on the fly by the performers in response to prompts, and they just start telling the sketch. They don't stop, they don't write down a plan, they just go. I contend that the world is full of improv. Over here on the right, we see a bunch of NBA basketball players. Sports are improv. Here are a few simple rules. Here are your goals. Here are the other people who have exactly the opposite goals. Go to it. See what you can create. Sports are the epitome of improv. Down here on the lower right, we have a graphic. It's much better when it's an animated graphic, but I couldn't find my animated version. But a graphic of traffic through a busy city street at night. It's all improv. It is all people responding to cues. It is not some master computer scheduling anything, at least in today's world. Who knows what we'll see in 20 years in terms of highways. But today, every person on there is responding to the cues around them and the goals they have and making their individual decisions. And together, they make a traffic flow. And when they screw up, they make a traffic stop. And again, it was much better when I had an animated clip, but the clip on the bottom right of surfing. Surfing is improv. You don't know what wave you're going to catch. You don't know what waves there will be that day. All you know is that you are prepared with things you know how to do and ways you know how to respond so that when the great wave comes along, you're there to take your shot. Improv is preparedness for whatever comes along and response when it comes. But in my subtitle, I said this is help for plotters and pantsers. So let's talk about those two general classes of writers. We have our plotters, sometimes called outliners. They make an outline of what they're going to do before they do it because they don't want to be surprised and they're afraid of painting themselves into a corner they can't get out of, and they don't like wasted words. They want to avoid those wasted words. So they avoid wasted words by planning out what words they're going to make and then only making those words. Pantsers, or some people call us discovery writers, love to write from the seat of our pants. We don't want to be bored. As soon as I know the ending, I kind of start to lose interest in the story. I want to be surprised by it as much as anybody. And I don't believe you can paint yourself into a corner. There's no paint, there's no corners. It's all in your head. If you had paint and you paint yourself into a corner, then paint yourself a door, which has been done 100 times in different comic strips. And I don't consider words wasted. Even if I never use them, they were practice. But I don't say you have to be a pantser. I get very annoyed at people who say I must be a plotter. I also don't think it's an either or. Most writers are somewhere in the middle on this. But I'm going to try to show how improv has lessons to learn for both. So a lot of this is inspired by this book called Improv Wisdom by Patricia Ryan Madsen, who is an emerita professor at Stanford, taught for 3 decades in the drama department. She founded an influential Stanford improvisers group back in 1991. And it took her 20 years to write a book on improv, which tells you that she didn't improv the book. She's not at all blind to the humor in that. She points it out. But it's a wonderful book on not the craft of improv itself, because there are plenty of books on those. It is a book on life lessons that she drew from her experience with improv. And I then said, those life lessons certainly can apply in writing. So I'm going to recommend her book if you're curious to learn more. I'll be just touching some high points today. And these are straight from her book, 13 Maxims of Improv, 13 general tools, not rules, tools that can help you be successful in improvising, whether it's improvising a performance on stage, improvising a life, because she is saying that improv is a great strategy for dealing with things that happen in life, or in our case, improvising stories. Now, if you are a plotter, you will bring this improvisation first to the plotting table as you spontaneously try to come up with good ideas and filter out the ones you want to do. And then later on discover, oh, wait, but I changed my mind and I'm flexible and able to change my mind. If you're a pantser, these are tools you have in your head as you start to do whatever it is we do that makes stories just fall out of our mouths or out of our fingers onto the keyboard. In my case, as a dictator, it falls out of my mouth. So I want to talk about these and how you would apply them to the writing world. The first, most fundamental principle she brings is the say yes principle. And we'll see this multiple times. It is a recurring theme in the improv world. But she talks about it specifically in brainstorming. And if you are a plotter especially, you should look at brainstorming. If you're a pantser, you sort of are brainstorming every step along the way. But if you're a plotter, you need to think of a lot of good ideas up front so you can figure out of those, which are the ones that you're actually going to make use of. Which are the ones that excite you? Which are the ones with potential? But the very first rule of brainstorming is you don't say no at this point. You will see this technique taught in corporate leadership sessions, in strategy sessions. The concept of brainstorming starts with today. There are no good ideas and no bad ideas. There are just ideas. We are trying to gather ideas. A great idea, but we're not going to call it great, is an idea that gives somebody another idea. Because the purpose of brainstorming is to explore ideas. And when you can't figure out if it makes sense, make it make sense. Try to add to it. The idea here is simply going through ideas as fast as possible, gathering them and collating them and seeing where they lead. And sometimes they lead to the darndest places. And this is going to be a chain of brainstorming from the real world, which we call the tale of the purple unicorns. A couple weeks back, I guess almost a month now, we had our tribute to Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Mesta, and we talked about their lessons on professionalism for writers. And one of their lessons is do the work well, whatever the work is. Do not think that some work you can be slapdash on because it doesn't matter. If someone's asked for this work, if you've agreed to this work, take it seriously. I don't care if it's a purple unicorn story. Write the best purple unicorn story you can. That's essentially a direct quote from their presentation, or it used to be, because things changed from there. They would make this purple unicorn storyline and people would laugh. It seemed like a funny joke, a good example of the sort of thing that nobody was going to take seriously. So it was a good example of write it professionally and well anyway. Except people would later come to Kevin with purple unicorn stories and say, I think I have a purple unicorn story. And so it kind of became a running joke that anytime they talked about purple unicorn stories, people were taking this seriously. So that brainstorming thing of just throw the idea out there was generating new ideas. But that's not the end of the purple unicorn story. The tale of the purple unicorns later leads to, at one point during Superstars writing seminar, the writing seminar that Kevin and Rebecca and several other professionals run in February every year. Great if you want to learn the business side especially, but also some of the craft side of writing. They were trying to come up with an idea for a charity anthology to help raise scholarship money for students who were having a hard time paying to attend Superstars. And somebody jokingly suggested that it ought to be a purple unicorn anthology. That joke lasted about a quarter of a second before everybody said, yes, it has to be a purple unicorn anthology. And that purple unicorn anthology became legendary in that group, that everybody wanted to write the best purple unicorn story they possibly could. Everybody was on board with what started as a joke, a ridiculous exaggeration to try to point things out. It wasn't ridiculous, it was a challenge. And it sparked ideas and it got people thinking. And eventually, it produced a very successful anthology that sold well. It funded scholarships for the Superstars group, including it managed to have, in fact, a story by Mr. Unicorn, Peter S. Beagle, the guy who wrote The Last Unicorn. Kevin had contacts and talked to him, and so they included a Peter Beagle unicorn story. But the tale of the purple unicorns is not even done there. An example of the brainstorming in action. The no idea is ridiculous. Write it down, think about it later. Gama Martinez, a good friend, an excellent writer, and a hardworking guy, one of the bravest people I know. I could talk for another 20 minutes on how brave Gama is. But Gama, at dinner later, as they were talking about the story ideas, mentioned something, and I have absolutely no idea what led to this. I wasn't there, but he mentioned a story of a purple unitato. And he's like, what? Oh, yeah. A unicorn who has been, for his transgressions, has been transformed into a potato. And he has to find his way back to being a unicorn. He has to learn his lessons and become a unicorn. And Gama's Purple Unitato is one of the most popular stories in that collection, all because he didn't say no. So during brainstorming, no ideas are bad. Ideas are to be gathered, and you think about them later. So that is the say yes lesson from improv. Related, and this is one which doesn't sit well with the plotters, and I understand, but if you're working on an improv approach, don't prepare too hard. As we said in our Bradbury session several, I guess, months ago now, Bradbury gave advice that was considered to be humorous. Write a short story every week. It's not possible to write 52 bad short stories in a row. And people will laugh, but he wasn't kidding. You're not trying to create perfect stories. You are creating lots of stories to explore ideas and see what works. You are trying to reach a point where you have good ideas that you've explored and you've polished and you've figured out. But you have to be there and just start creating them. And I wanted to give an example of a personal example here. This was a case of not preparing. These are my results of dictation for the past week and a fraction. As I think most of you are aware, I had a diabetic ulcer in my foot this summer. I was not permitted to do any serious amount of walking, and I was not permitted to do a serious amount of driving. Keep it to a minimum, but it certainly meant I had to work from home. And I like working from home. But I wasn't finishing much. Fortunately, I had you folks here, so I had my fingers still in the writing business, doing the jazz sessions, but I had no real space for writing. And then last week, I got my diabetic shoes and I'm officially healed and I can start walking again and I can go back into work. And as I've mentioned, I dictate my fiction. And I have an hour drive each way to work and an hour drive home. And every one of those is a dictation session. And if you look at the bottom right, we see, let's see, where's the bottom? Now I've lost it. I think it's off here, but I had basically prior to last week, I had about one dictation session a week when I drove to my doctor's appointment. Could I have dictated at home? Could I dictate when I'm not driving? I have, certainly. But driving is the place where I sit down and just say, heck, I'm here. I ought to dictate. And all of a sudden, I have got a whole bunch of sessions on one story, and then another session on another story, and then last night, 2 more sessions on a third story. That because I just, instead of saying, am I ready to write? Am I ready to dictate? What do I have to do to get ready to dictate? I said, I'm here. Let's dictate. I didn't prepare. I just did. And I have dictated somewhere around 15,000 hours in the past week because I didn't try to prepare and be ready. I just did it. Are all 15,000 good? No, there's 1,000 words I threw out completely. 1,000 words I dictated on the economics of vat-grown turkey meat that seemed really important when I was saying it. And when it was all said and done, I said, what does this have to do with the story? Just because the characters in the story are discussing turkey meat does not mean that the reader wants to hear about vat-grown turkey meat. So I cut 1,000 words, but I had 15,000 words and I only cut 1,000. Here, back to the surfing metaphor, one of the principles of improv is just show up, be there, be ready to do the work. Be ready in your place and time. You will not be the world's best surfer if you're not out there on the waves. Having a place where you do your work, a time when you do your work, is a way to train your brain to do the work, to train your body if you're doing something like sports, but to train your brain for a writer. Being in the place and the time helps you make your brain ready to work. Now, every person is different on this. Your place might be your quiet office, and your time might be 5 a.m. before the world wakes up. God help me, that would kill me. I am not an early riser, but I know people who are. Your place might be 9 or 10 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning, like the late Mike Resnick, because the world's all gone to sleep, so they're leaving him alone. That's worked great for Mike. I wish I could have Mike's schedule, but I still have a day job that I have to deal with. Finding your place and finding your time is the trick. But when you find it, use it. And in my case, it's right there. If you look at my Jeep, I've taken a Sharpie and written on it, is the recorder on? I have trained my brain that if I'm behind the wheel of that Jeep and I turn on my recorder, because sometimes I just think I'd rather listen to an audiobook, or sometimes I just say I'm not in the mood. And it's like, no. Mood has nothing to do with it. As I just demonstrated on the prior slide, if I am in the Jeep and I turn on the recorder, story will happen. I've trained that. I can't tell you that would happen for you, but you have to train yourself. Find your place, find your time, show up. And when you show up, things will happen. This next one is an improv rule that I think is great for writers, but it's also sometimes hard for writers. The idea that you don't have to start at the beginning, you can start anywhere. Wherever you start, then you can go forward, you can go back, you can go around, you can replace stuff, clean it up later. Don't be addicted to starting at the start and going through to the end. Now, if you're a plotter, when you get to the writing phase, you probably want to start at the start and build to the end. But even then, you don't have to. But when you're doing the plotting phase, plot out the pieces that actually you know, and then look for what you're going to do between those places. And look for weaker parts and strengthen them. Abandon the idea that you have to start with in the beginning and end with happily ever after. You might write your happily ever after first. That might be the ending you want everything else to lead to. Don't worry about where you start. Worry about that you start. Another principle from the book being average. Don't try to make everything brilliant. Again, from Mike Resnick, they can't all be your best work. But the more work you do, the better work you'll produce. Let's go back and look at Bradbury again with his one story a week method. He had an 80-year career and he did at least 50 stories per year. Friends all attest that this wasn't a joke. This was the way he worked. He describes it in his book, The Zen of Writing. 50 stories a year times 80 years is 4,000 stories the man wrote. And he published 600 of them. He published a whopping 15% because those were the good ones. And the other 85% were just average, but he didn't get the good ones without trying, without producing a lot of average. And his good ones are absolute gems. So the be average principle says it's better to do work that's average than no work at all. And if you do work and you're just accepting that average happens, sometimes you'll be a lot better than average. Another principle from the book, paying attention. And in this particular case, paying attention to what came before. Now, in traditional improv, and this is why improv and writing are not the same thing, although there are similarities. In traditional improv, you are improvising with a team. In writing, you might have a collaborator, but it's often alone. Now, with a team, paying attention means that if I tell you that my character is Mr. Hassenpfeffer, the great chef, and you then come back and can't remember my name and what my occupation is as we go on your journey across the desert, you haven't paid attention. You have not respected my contribution. You've gone off on your own. And this is considered extremely impolite, extremely poor teamwork in improv. But if you're your only team, you still owe yourself just as much as anything else. Everything that you've already said at this point is true in a sense. This is, again, sort of the yes and approach. It is true unless you change your mind. Nothing's written in stone. But you should treat it as true unless you have a reason not to. Take notes, remember it. And then face the facts, which is the corollary to the previous one of the truth. Now that you know what's quote unquote true within your story, build on that. Whatever is true is now a foundation for your next step. How can you make it make sense? Do you have to retroactively go back and fix things to make it make sense? Because there are no corners, there is no paint. You can fix things, but you generally have to recognize what you have created and build upon it. And this in improv is most especially captured in the very first improv exercise most people learn called yes and.
Let's plan my birthday party.
Yes, and we can talk about the kind of cake you're going to have.
Yes, and we can have cake and ice cream.
Yes, and it could be chocolate ice cream.
Yes, and we can wear party hats.
Yes, and I can get a pony for all the guests to ride on.
Yes, and I can enter on the pony.
Yes, and you can be throwing out rose petals as you come in.
Yeah, and we'll have a piñata with candy in it.
Yeah, and the candy will also have gold coins inside it.
Yeah, and everyone will get...
All right, so there is a example of the yes and exercise for a team. Notice how we started with the simple concept of birthday party, and we ended up with handing out gold coins, and I don't know who's going to pay for those gold coins. This is why after you throw out the ideas, you go back and make sense of them later. But during the moment, what came before is your basis for what comes next. And whether it's you with a partner and a team or it's you with yourself, respect what came before. One of the worst sins you can do in improv, one of the biggest lessons you have to learn is you never say no. Now, advanced techniques you will, but that's a different matter. For the basic process, you don't say no. If she had said, yeah, I'm getting ready for my birthday, and he said, no, your birthday's next month, he has just pulled the rug out from under her. Now, if she is agile, she'll say, yes, but we're celebrating it now because I will be in Honolulu next month. And he says, Honolulu? I want to go there. And she says, well, you could come with me, but you're going to have to pay your own way. And he says, well, I suppose I could sell raffle tickets at your birthday party, and we're back to the birthday party. So you can make up for someone who breaks the chain, but is considered extremely rude and selfish to say no to someone's idea when you're in the moment improvising. The reason being that you're doing that because you have an idea. You have a plan in mind. You have someplace you're steering towards. And it's supposed to be about the agility that you're not steering, you are discovering. But you may have to do some retroactive fixes when you come up to a discovery point that is so out of fit with what came earlier, something has to give. A next principle is staying on course. And this takes some learning. I just saw Jenna pop up, and now I see her. She's gone again. Let me see if she's still here. No? Okay. She popped up briefly, and she's gone. This is one of the hardest lessons for a new improviser to learn and a new writer in the world of improvisation. It can seem like you're not getting anywhere. It can seem hard. It's really easy to give up. And now we have something in the chat. Hello in the chat. Chat window says, you're here, Jenna. Good. I saw you popping up as being in the waiting room, and I'm confused. So, the idea that because it's getting rough, you give up means you end up doing a lot of stuff that just never actually finishes because everything gets rough. Try to see it through. There is going to be time later when you're done with exploring it to decide whether to keep it or throw it away. But stay on the course. And I'm going to show an example where I stayed on the course and it went someplace that nobody, literally nobody, expected. Hello. There we go. This was Firetober 2023. Jenna posted as part of FireCon, she posted 31 days of story prompts. And the challenge was to do flash fiction in every one of those 31 days. I write longer than flash. I was writing in response to the prompts, different stories, and watch this progression. We have a message. Plus a bonus prompt. Yes, she had bonus prompts. Practically every day was a bonus prompt. So this was the first few prompts. And I was just going to write a story in response to every prompt. So the first prompt was the new neighbors, and I wrote a story about dead pirates in an afterlife on the bottom of the sea, and new drowning victims arrive, and they are introducing the new drowning victims to their new afterlife. It was fun. The next prompt was It's Alive. And of course, that's a classic monster prompt from many movies, including one called It's Alive. But I went in a different direction. I wrote of an editor whose slush pile comes to life. He's this editor for a struggling science fiction magazine, and he has to fight his own slush pile. And then the next prompt was No Exit, also the name of a classic play. And I ended up writing a story about a mathematician who's in a coma because of an accident. He can't really remember what the accident was, but somehow he's got to logic his way out of the coma while his wife and doctor are so concerned about what's happening to him. And he's sort of aware of that, but he's got to find a way out, and he's got to logic his way out. The doctor's treatment requires him to find his own way out. And then their next prompt was a walk in the cemetery. And I'm like, well, cemetery, and I probably should do some science fiction. And I'm imagining an archaeologist on a distant world that she finds hidden alien tombs. Okay. Fifth prompt, door in the wall. I'm writing these daily as she's prompting it. So I'm already doing improv. She's prompt was door in the wall. I'm like, okay, so I've got a delivery driver, and she sees packages disappear from a porch after she delivers them. And she has to understand why. But along the way, as she's understanding why, I discover, because I'm a discovery writer, that she is a writer and she's writing for the struggling science fiction magazine that's mentioned in number 2. And suddenly I started to have this voice in the back of my head saying, do it. Do it. These aren't short stories. This is one novel. And I said, nah, do it. And the very next prompt was mirror. And the third one with the mathematician ended with him escaping from his coma, but he's still pretty beat up from his accident. He's out of his coma, but he keeps seeing things in mirrors, reflections of things he saw in his dream. He's wondering, is he really out? Did something follow him out? And as he's doing this wondering, he is in a donut shop, which was where the delivery driver from the 5th episode often stopped on her runs. And now the mathematician and the delivery driver and the editor are all in the same world. Do it. Do it. Prompt number 7 was space visitors. Well, that sounds like a story similar to the archaeologist, so I'll just reuse her. And she discovers an alien infiltrator on her space station. And I'm like, what does this have to do with the editor and the mathematician and the delivery driver? Because they're all tied in with this science fiction magazine, which publishes stories. And maybe these are stories that an author wrote for this magazine. And then the very next one was The Monster Is, and the connection there was a little looser. I could explain it, but it'd take some time. But it involved a writing group who's searching for their missing friend. And that friend is a regular contributor to the struggling science fiction magazine. And I didn't have to say do it anymore. I knew at this point, I am going to write 31 chapters of a novel, and I don't know what the novel is yet. My principle for that entire month was right there at the top of the page. Stay on course. Today I'm going to write a story, and I will somehow tie it in with this magazine and the missing writer and the disappearing packages and the slush pile that came alive. And I will somehow tie them all together. And I don't have to know now yet. I'm just going to stay on course and it will happen. I failed in one regard that I ended up with 32 chapters instead of 31 because the story had to have a finish on the day after Halloween. So I failed because I wrote too much. So I stayed on course. The next principle, wake up to the gifts, where she's talking about things are going to happen in the world that you can respond to them without having planned for them because you are in a state of preparedness and readiness because of all of your other habits. And we as writers can have many different things that will give us ideas out of the blue. The classic line is people asking a writer, where do you get your ideas? And the writer says, I don't know. Or the writer, if they're clever, says a joke like Harlan Ellison used to say, there's a post office box in Schenectady, and if you send them $5, they will send you 5 story ideas. Because he was trying to make out the point that asking where they came from it didn't make sense. Sadly, he had people come up to him after these talks and ask what the post office box number was. You've got prompts all over all the time. Things that just come up. And hey, that thing that came up, whether it's you misunderstood something or somebody said something, that's the start of a story if you're willing to run with it. And as a matter of fact, yesterday, I have my diabetic shoes now. I can walk up to an hour per day. I went to my second favorite place on earth, Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park, because I love sculpture and I wanted to see the new sculpture they had. The sculpture, which is called Amalgam Origin by Nick Cave. It's a bizarre sculpture about what looks like a figure of a man, but as it rises up and you get to the torso, tree branches start coming out and keeps rising up. And now it's a tree with dozens of different birds nesting in it. And first of all, there's going to be a story to go with that tree because I write stories for most of the sculptures at the gardens and I can already see elements of that story. But then when I came back in the hall leading out to the park was this sculpture, this structure, not a sculpture, an arch with these branches going over and the lights in it. And I really don't know what it was there for. I have two suspicions. One is they are a wedding venue, and maybe somebody wanted this for their wedding party to proceed down. But the other is they're coming up, they do an annual light show. So this might be part of the light show that they're setting up early. I don't really know, but when I looked at it, I had a thought, and in fact, I posted it on Facebook. Don't go through the fairy arch. What comes out, you won't be what comes out the other end. Just a laugh, just a prompt, random statement. And, oh, I thought I had a slide for this. That's a random statement. I thought it was a joke. And as of today, I have 3,000 words written on an Irish folk tale about a guy who, against all advice, goes through the fairy arch and what goes wrong in his life afterwards. Because it was a gift. I had no idea I was writing an Irish folk tale 24 hours ago. Life handed me the fairy arch. And now I have a story that I think is really cool. And I think I'm going to pull it off. And probably because I do the other habits like showing up and doing the work and being prepared, I am probably going to finish that story over the next week. Her 10th maxim is making mistakes. And I find this in a lot of parts of life. People who are afraid to make a mistake so they do nothing at all. Because the mistake is worse than doing nothing, right? Well, in some cases it is. In some cases, the old medical maxim, first do no harm. If you don't know what to do and what you're doing might kill the patient, why don't you not do that? Mistakes are bad. Of course, in that world, often it's only choice of which mistake. You've got to try something. But when it comes to writing, what can it hurt? What are you going to lose? Some time, some words. You'll get through that. Don't worry about whether it works. The mistake is just a learning opportunity. When you are doing your improvisation, it is a thought exercise, not yet a finished product. If the idea is cool, you'll finish it later. And related to that is acting now. There's an old rule in the military, and I won't quote it exactly right, but essentially it is a wrong decision now is better than a right decision too late. And there's wisdom behind that thought. It sounds like a simple sort of jokey rule, but sometimes the only way you learn more is to do something. So if you act right now with as much knowledge as you have, you'll learn more knowledge. But if you wait until you know everything, you'll never finish because you'll never know anything. So do it now. You'll generate knowledge by acting now. You will discover that, oh my God, nobody cares about the economics of vat-grown turkeys. But I had to write the economics of vat-grown turkeys to realize how completely boring and pointless it was for the story. I had to act and then learn. And then she gets into a team orientation and a self and relationship orientation point of view, which is taking care of each other. You're in this with other people. You are not just alone. I hope, if nothing else, you've got this class as part of your community. People can be your sounding boards and you can be theirs. Quack, quack for those people out there who are my ducks and I'm their ducks. Prompts. You can give each other prompts, give each other story ideas. You might collaborate on a story. You might have students, you might have mentors, and you can even take care of your audience. All of these people are around you and involved in your life, and taking care of each other makes it easier to improvise the story when the time comes because you've got each other's back and you're supporting each other and you're helping each other evaluate ideas. And her last maxim, enjoy the ride. Improv can be very freeing and fun. It should be surprising. I argue from my experience that it does become easy. As uncomfortable as it can feel at the start, it does become easy. And it's a tool. It's a small investment you can make that has potentially big payoffs. Hey, I'm going to actually kind of be early for once. Improv is just a tool, just something you have to be aware of. You don't have to do. As Kipling told us, 69 ways of constructing tribal lays, and every single one of them is right. Improv is one of the many ways. On the other hand, if you are a structured person, if you believe you need to have more structure, we can have improv games. We can have improv games in the sense that improv games in the performance improv mean particular bits, particular routines, particular ways of structuring a performance. Well, we already talked about structure for 3 weeks in making story models. We talked about Kurt Vonnegut with his fortune graphs. Well, suppose you put up a fortune graph and say, that's what I want my shape to be. I want my shape to be that we have the narrator falls in a hole and scrambles to climb up and falls again and scrambles to climb up and falls again. Then when you're improving, at some point you say, shouldn't he fall in the hole right now? What hole is there around? Okay, let's have him fall into that. You describe that. Okay, now he needs to climb out. What's around him? What makes him think he can climb out? Okay, write that. Okay, what fails? What did he get wrong? What did he miss? And how does he slide down again? And so on. That fortune graph can guide your ideation. The more traditional 3-act structure. Something changes, things get worse, pay the price. This is a simple structure that you can say, first I'm going to improvise my first act, my normal world, and then I need something to change. I need an inciting incident that's going to make the world change. So what is that going to be? And you improvise that. Okay, now things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. I need to improvise those until I see a point where the narrator or the protagonist has a chance to turn everything around if they will just make the right decision. What was that right decision and how does that change everything? And now we can succeed. You might take the hero's journey and use those as a guide as you improvise. Kisho Tenketsu, the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese approach to story structure. Same concept as what I just said for the 3-act structure, but what you are using as your guide points are, here now we are changing, and here now we discover the twist, and here now we are dealing with the twist. Use those to guide you in what you improvise next. This particular one I drew, it's a map of picaresque stories. So this is a Vonnegut fortune graph, although in this case it is hand-drawn because I happen to have a sketch that I'd already used and I just reused it because I was in a hurry. Picaresque, if you're unfamiliar with the term, is essentially a story genre of generally lovable scoundrels who have ideas and the ideas get them into trouble and they have to dig themselves out of that trouble, which only leads to bigger trouble, and so on. Classic example, Han Solo and Chewbacca in their adventures when they're not involved with Luke and Leia and the Death Star. There were a number of stories where they had all these schemes and they just made things worse. The Rhodes movies with Hope and Crosby are examples of picaresque. The late Mike Resnick wrote his Lucifer Jones books, which are picaresques. The idea with the picaresque, the general shape is they're having their ordinary day. They'd like to get rich, or they'd like to get famous, or they'd like to. So they come up with this grand scheme and they start to work out the grand scheme and discover a real problem. And now they're in trouble. And now they've got to deal with that trouble. They've got to think on their feet. They've got to talk their way out of it. And they talk their way out of it so well that they get a really good opportunity that is, hey, I am free. I am safe. But now I never got the payoff I expected on my first one. So I'm back to kind of normal. But now we know what went wrong. So we're going to try to do it better. But now I get in more trouble. So now I've got to climb even higher to get out of it. And you repeat and you repeat. And the general structure of picaresque is you never really become rich and famous. The best you hope for is you're a little better off than you were at the beginning, and you get free by the skin of your teeth. If I wanted to write a picaresque and I was improvising, I could do the whole thing just with this picture to guide me of what should happen next. What sort of thing, not specific things, sort of things of it's time for the big disaster. What's it going to be? And I look around, look at all the facts, all of the yeses that I've already seen, and now here's my and. Related, Orson Scott Card likes to describe stories in terms of a mice quotient, milieu, idea, character, event. And those are 4 different axes he grades a story on, and they sort of add up to fortune graphs, but it's really a multi-dimensional fortune graph. But you could plan out an idea where you want your knowledge, your level of surprise to go up and then come back down as we learn to deal with things. You could lay out a graph like this and just improvise to it. We talked about framing stories. We talked about histories. We talked about the collider. The collider is a good opportunity for improvisation. You might not even know what the collision is going to be yet as you start to work out what your different character groups are each after and what their tactics are. You start to discover the collision. This is what I did with A Fine and Dangerous Season. I early on, around day 11 or 12, somewhere in there, started to recognize a collider happening because the reader was seeing all of the characters with all of their goals, but none of the characters were seeing each other. Classic collider. And I just had to say, okay, I need to keep bringing these folks so close that they almost meet each other, but not yet because I'm not ready, not ready, not ready. And around day 20, I said, okay, they have to collide now. And now what comes after? Twilight Zone, very common premise that I talked about before, where everything has to deal with the known versus the unknown and how things get weirder, and every attempt you make to try to understand the weirdness, to get control of it, eventually leads to more weirdness until in the final reveal, you have a tragic understanding. That now finally you understand how ruined your life is when it's far too late. I could lay that out and tell a Twilight Zone style story just by trying to follow that shape. A fundamental opening principle taught in many different workshops is just start with a character in a setting and a problem and ask what happens next. And all of these earlier maxims we've looked at help us guide what happens next. You say yes, you pay attention to what came before, you look at the facts, you stay on course, see where you can take it, look for gifts, look for discoveries, things you accidentally did that turn out to be really helpful for the story. Make your mistakes and act now. And this is how I do for conferences, FireCon included. I do the instant story show where I have the audience give me my character, my setting, and a problem, and for an hour I tell a story. And then the last one we saw in our South Park Secrets session, the very first jazz session. You look and say, as you are creating the story on the fly, every next beat, every next scene should either be therefore, after the last scene, therefore this happens, Or after the last scene, but this happens. Or meanwhile, while that last scene was going on, this other thing happens. Or eventually, that meanwhile comes into collision with us. So all of these different structures work perfectly well with improv. They become sort of guide marks as you're improvising. Hey, it feels like I've been going along this path for too long. I need to change this. I did this in my book, The Last Campaign, where I was roughly what felt like it ought to be the middle of the book. It was a mystery story, a murder mystery, a corporate espionage, corruption mystery. And I reached a point where it just felt like everything was going too smoothly. And if I let it keep going that smoothly, the detective was going to clean up everything 40,000 words in, and my commitment was 90,000 words. And I said, okay, I need a meanwhile. And that meanwhile is going to help me set new direction in the story. Meanwhile, somebody gets killed. Since I had no real outline or plan, I didn't know somebody was going to get killed then, but I realized the point right here, right now, I need a dramatic, drastic change, so I'll kill somebody. And I figured out who I could spare and who would raise the most questions for the readers, and I killed him right there, and I found out why and who later. All right. So, any questions here? We're just about exactly at the end, actually. Any questions? All right.
Think of at the moment.
I'm hearing a very faint voice.
I just said not that I can think of at the moment.
Thank you. All right, so here's our upcoming schedule. On the 9th, we'll be talking about openings. On the 16th, story strategies. 23rd, back to science, orbits and transfers. 30th, another tribute to my friend Jack McDevitt. 7th, a little bit about copyright. 14th on voice. And then 3 sessions on mysteries. And then for January 11th, I'm working on a modeling the movies session where I make a model of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So if we have no more questions, then I can call it a day, stop my recording, and wish you all a great day here.